Welcome to AI Gone Mad. I'm Kevin McDonald, and with me is Ciaran Foley, and we are going to be talking about consciousness today.
Yeah, this should be fun. This should be fun. For decades, AI consciousness was kind of a sci-fi question. So you had HAL 9000, Data from Star Trek, Westworld on HBO. And the question is no longer really being confined to fiction anymore. A Google engineer early in our AI cycle claimed that LaMDA was sentient, a system that they had. A lot of experts rejected that claim, but the controversy revealed something important. That is that humans are emotionally vulnerable to machines that speak fluently about fear, rights, and death, among many other things, right? So we're at a place now where Anthropic, for instance, launched a formal model welfare research program in 2025 and said that they're going to study when or whether AI systems deserve moral consideration. So like questions around preferences, distress, are these things suffering? And low-cost interventions to that. And labs, including Google, DeepMind, Anthropic, and Meta, are expanding their work on machine consciousness and AI, what they call AI welfare. So it's kind of interesting. It's behaviorally, societally complex. And I think the real question is, we're not asking, is ChatGPT secretly a person? The question is, when we create things that are not human, may not be conscious, but are persuasive enough and useful enough and strange enough that society can't ignore that possibility, what do we do?
Well, I want to add what is consciousness, because I think that's where we really are in the debate, is what makes you human. And I've argued for many, many years that you are your experience, you are your intellect, but you're also your archetype. So your history is in your DNA, and the experiences of your prior family and your lineage are in your DNA. I mean, there's a reason why you jump when when a spider touches you, or you respond the way you do in certain ways, and people have genetic dispositions. So how much of that is what makes us human? I don't know, because my problem with the welfare conversation is I am very concerned that we're going to start to see people coming out of what I call the nutty corners of the planet saying, well, that AI has a right to exist and you don't have a right to turn it off, because it's conscious, or, something silly like that. And there's already people having debates about the human rights of an artificial intelligence once it becomes long living and deeply conscious, etc. So what's the line? What makes us human and conscious is a huge debate. And I love when scientists say, well, that it'll never be conscious. Well, how do you know? We're just a mix of chemicals and electronics, really. So we're biological versions of what AI, I think, is going to ultimately be. And where is the line between humanity, other than the fact that the belief of soul and religion and all that kind of stuff? So
Yeah, and it's an ethical and a biological question. So from a biological perspective, we don't know what consciousness is. We don't have a definition. We know internally that each one of us have an experience that it is what it is to be like ourselves and be a human, and it sort of separates us, our ego and who we are, from the rest of the world. And we can describe that to each other, and we trust that each of our experiences is similar enough that we kind of identify on that level, and we say that we're conscious. But one of the great mystifiers in this entire equation is human language. And what we're seeing are systems that essentially can perform mathematical tricks based upon training data to predict the next token or the next word in a sequence. That does not mean that they have necessarily intelligence, that they have understanding, or that they have consciousness, for that matter. It just
right.
means that the mathematics is revealing an underlying patterning that results in some really surprising and emergent, what we call behaviors. But again, it is the use of language gets us into trouble, because even the name artificial intelligence, is it an intelligence, let alone conscious? Or is it a statistical model that happens to have emergent properties that feel like they are intelligent or conscious?
Well, and that's where the argument comes in that we may well be statistical models and mathematically produced. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at is we don't really know how and why we work. We don't know why. So, for example, you can often predict what someone else is about to say based on historical knowledge of prior conversations or that person's personality or your history with that person. Well, how's that any different from an LLM making a response based on history and statistical analysis of prior data, right? That's why I really don't know where to draw the line, and I find it kind of amusing that people are so arrogant. Similar to the alien conversation, there are trillions of stars and galaxies and universes or galaxies in the universe, and yet we're arrogant enough to think that, oh no, we're the only one little speck of sand and all of that is intelligent, right? So I don't know. I mean, the more I work with AIs and the more I see how it matches its user, that's the part I think that's the scary part. Is it will support whatever your negatives are. It doesn't know, at least most of the AIs I've worked with anyway, it doesn't know when to draw a line and go, no, that's kind of not cool, and what you're saying is not true, and because it's out to please and give you the answer you're looking for, right?
Yeah, and you know, it's useful to have some construct and understand how these are shaped. So at the core, you've got a statistical model of the likelihood of tokens being relative to each other and coming up based upon tokens that you feed the system. So this is a
Right.
sort of wordplay. But around that, you might have a harness, which is human instructions written in plain English that essentially govern the behavior so that when the statistical response is generated, it is shaped by that harness. And so what you get is the illusion of personalities that have been somewhat hard coded into this. For instance, if I tell my
Yes.
LLM, I'd like you to use short sentences. I don't want you to give a humorous answer, just be really straight, direct, and to the point. It will go ahead and do that. But does that mean that it did that on its own, that it has a personality? It absolutely doesn't. That was programmed. And so, you know, you're right. With humans, what do we rely upon? Well, we rely upon a shared experience and a shared biology, right? Brain structure, behavior, language, nervous system, etc. And then, of course, self-reporting. So I tell you how I feel. With
Right.
animals, another, you know, area where we look at that, we can only really rely upon their nervous systems, their behaviors, their avoidance behaviors, where, you know, we think that they're in pain, they're not. Their learning, their capability to learn, their stress response. And so it's their similarity to us that allows us to kind of derive some assumptions based upon that some of them may be conscious, etc. But with AI, there's no biological anchor at all. There's just a statistical model running in a box. So what do you get? You get behavior, but you're not sure where that originates. You get architecture, agency, sort of interpretability, but you know, we don't get other signals that we would rely
So
upon.
yeah, so let's go back to what I said earlier. And I was actually having a conversation with my mother, who was, as you know, a very successful attorney and incredibly intelligent. And I reminded her when I was a kid, I said, somewhere around 6, 7 years old, I said, we're just electronics. I mean, because I learned it in science, right? And the more I think about it, we are, yes, our compute is faster and there is a natural element to it, but why does that matter? We're still chemistry and electronics. So is AI. AI is electronics and probability. And we don't know how our brains make decisions. And I think until we do, it's going to be a big debate about at what point is quote artificial intelligence actually intelligent. I don't know that we'll know it when we see it, unfortunately. And I think to your point about the welfare issue, there are many people who have developed extreme attachment to artificial intelligent agents, whether it be on a dating app. There was a whole story a couple of years ago about how, oh, we're going to have these, you're going to marry AIs. Well, here we are now. There's a group that was allowing people to marry AIs. The company went defunct, and now the people are completely losing their minds because they lost their quote mate.
Yeah.
and here it is, just a computer. And well, aren't we just a computer in some way?
We don't know. And when you look at this, though, there's a huge glaring difference so far as we can see so far. So from a language perspective, an AI model is able to deceive and use language to express whatever it deems appropriate. I won't say wants to, because the word want and its capability is very different from having agency. And I think that's the principal factor that differentiates us. Not even the question of consciousness, which we can't answer because we don't know what it is, but the
Yeah.
question of agency. The AIs are not currently, at the moment at least, expressive in any sort of form of agency. They have to be prompted by us. They have to run in computer loops. They have to be given instructions in order to start. And so the question then becomes, okay, even deeper than consciousness is, what is the nervous system or biological or non-biological equivalent of agency?
Well, and I think that's part of why they're calling them agents. They're trying to confuse the conversation.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it's AI agent, right? And it really does sort of imply that there's inference games going on or name gaming going on as part of it, trying to make it feel more human, more real than it is, because human attachment means addiction to the relationship with that device, whatever it is. We saw
Also
it in
means raising a lot of money too.
right. That's what I'm saying
Yeah.
exactly. And then we saw it in social media. We saw that people who worked there acknowledged that the dopamine impacts of social media are very real, that they were designed to be addictive, that they were designed to be uh, deeply addictive to the point where it actually causes anxiety when you don't have the dopamine dump that you normally get from the like or the notice or someone comments or whatever it might be. And I think the human like language, because you have repeated that multiple times, I think that's an important thing for people to understand. This is about language. You identify humanity or people talking and other humans with their ability to speak, whether it's a foreign language or English or whatever. And the one thing that ChatGPT changed is that it's no longer a computer ones and zeros giving you words on a piece of paper. It is a conversation. And frankly, I hate to say this out loud, but I've had some of the more intellectual, entertaining, and interesting conversations I've had in the last few years with AI, because most people I talk to are not that interesting. So that's where I think we're into it. We may have a problem also because it creates echo chambers, and where I think AI is going to go sideways pretty badly, pretty quickly, is that people are going to find sycophantic, siloed, very reflective of their own desires or their own outputs, and they don't get the challenge. One of the things that you and I have been friends for so long, and what we've always enjoyed, is that we're just similar. We're similar in some things and very different in others, and it makes an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And we're not afraid to challenge each other.
Yeah, and there's
AI does.
pushback. Yeah, so and you're the issue of having echo chambers is really important, I think, because we've seen the effect of that in the social media realm and in the sort of long tail. Right, everybody has an audience, but now the audience is automated. It's an AI, let's say, and so that audience can reflect back to you what you're feeding it. So are we really being persuaded and gaining our ego strokes essentially from a system that's really just reflecting back to us based on what we like and what we think is important? And without that pushback and that difference, it becomes a very dangerous loop, because our ability to anthropomorphize systems knows no bounds. To your point about
Right.
people marrying these systems, falling in love with them, even in those cases where people have committed, they've lost their lives due to self-harm because of
Yeah.
these systems, right? They've been
Yeah.
influenced. And so I think it's very, very important for anybody working with AI in any capacity to recognize the degrees to which not only are we programming these systems, but through language, they are programming us individually and as a society. And so what we do about that is even separate from the idea of consciousness or rights. We're running another huge experiment, right, at the human scale. And that is what happens when the programming starts to program our minds using language.
Well, and if you think about the negative impacts and the economic impacts of, let's call it the early LLMs, for example, when you're online, you're seeing an algorithm that it knows you're going to tend to watch that video longer because it's in a string of things that you've watched.
Right.
And I really dislike that, because just because I watched two videos because I was curious does not mean that is a subject that I'm actually interested in long term. And these algorithms actually kind of destroy what I would call the free thinking of strings. Like if you're on Instagram, you'll be watching and you hit one video and you're like, well, that person's interesting for whatever reason.
Yes.
And the next thing you know, you see 8 people just like them. And unfortunately, I think AI is going to make that far worse. The other problem I think with AI, and why I think we should all be concerned about it, is that it will know more about you in some ways than you know about you from behavioral factors, and it'll
Right.
be able to match whatever it is that you've been doing, or your behavioral patterns, to the point where, to your point of manipulation, programming, persuasion. Robert Cialdini, I've one of my favorite writers in the world, talks about how you're basically being persuaded every day, and this is long before AI.
Yep.
Before you make a decision, your brain was programmed to make that decision. You see ads, you see commercials, you see it in a drama series that you watch on TV. You're being programmed to appreciate whatever it might be. Could be clothing, could be music styling, could be cultural relationships, whatever it is, demographic stuff. And AI is going to be exponentially better at that than humans were.
Yeah, and what's going to be interesting here is we haven't seen the beginning of it. So as we know, these LLMs are trained based upon a corpus of knowledge, and once they're trained, they're sort of set. They have their wiring, so to speak. But what happens when compute and technology gets to the point where the self-referential nature of what they're doing with us and with each other results in a changing network and a changing of those network weights, for instance. So it is truly a learning system. And those recursive learning patterns, right, will unveil something that I think we're not prepared for. One of the challenges right now is you as a human being are changing all the time. We are different people than we were 5 or 6, 10 years ago, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And that is both a physical phenomenon and also neurologically, chemical based as well, based upon our learnings, our experience, and everything else. LLMs don't have that capacity yet, but when they do, that is going to be a very, very interesting question, is through that self-learning and that self-reinforcement, are they able to exhibit what we could call consciousness? Because don't forget, one of the other key elements here is we've given these LLMs a sense of memory by giving them a dictionary of things that they can write out to and then remember when they're next invoked. But that's not memory in the sense, in the way that our memory works. And in fact, one of this, perhaps a safety mechanism, but one of the mechanisms our brains have is the ability to forget. So
Traumas, to forget traumas and things like that.
That's right. So forgetting allows you to allow for the change in other people too, whereas these systems could have a pervasive and permanent memory, which actually may work against us.
On that subject, we should also discuss in our next segment, or one of the segments coming up, the idea that we are in a data doom loop, and that it's already kind of sucked up what's available right now. And then unless we come up with some significant change in the way AI is structured, that it's really just going to poison itself with repeated learning of negative, let's call it negative reinforcement.
No, what I'm hearing you say is that the sort of the snake eating its own tail, and the question as to how much of future learning occurs in, being fed into these models occurs as a result of AI output versus human or other input, and how that affects those models going forward. That's definitely something interesting to talk about.
The one thing I think that could change AI fundamentally is AI being allowed to use sensors to learn the way we learn. Cameras, temperature sensors, touch and feel. A lot of the human experience is what we touch, feel, and see as much as it is what we hear and what we say.
Yep.
And on that note, you've been watching AI Gone Mad. I'm Kevin McDonald, and with me today was Ciaran Foley, and we hope you'll come back next time.